Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Catherine Addo.
Hello. Welcome, welcome. Sound is okay? Wonderful. So, we are here to talk about amplifying people-powered change. And I think this conversation will feel like a nice summation of a lot of the themes that we've explored over the past couple of days. So I'll introduce myself and then invite our panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll jump in. My name is Catherine Addo. I go by Cat Addo. Pronouns are she, her. I am joining you from New York, where I work at an organization called Purpose. We are a strategy, creative, and campaigning organization whose mission is to build and support movements that can advance the fight for an open, just, and habitable world. So we do this across issues, we do this across geographies, we do this across sectors, working in partnership with businesses, philanthropy, nonprofits, grassroots coalitions, governments. And so this idea of people-powered change is really more than an idea for us. It's essential to our theory of change. When you're looking at a sort of change-making ecosystem, it's essential that you have every kind of like node on your power map covered, inclusive of how these issues really take off at the grassroots level. So I'm very energized and excited to explore that with our panelists and with you today. And also inspired just by some of the candor and transparency that I've enjoyed from other speakers and panelists. I will just share with you an additional reason I am excited about this topic is that I am exhausted. I am exhausted in my bones, in my soul, in my blood, in a way that I really shouldn't be, considering the quality of my life, considering that, like, in the scheme of things, you know, I'm a first-generation American whose parents killed it. I have had a great education. I live where I want. I work in what I want. I have a great income. I'm doing meaningful work, and I am exhausted every single day, feeling like, while our social problems are recognized as vast and systemic and interconnected, the energy kind of switches into hyper-individualistic when it comes time to action against them. You know, it's like, prove it, propose it, scope it, pitch it, fix this, scale it, go over here, talk about it. Now I don't want to talk about that anymore. Stop talking about it. It is exhausting. It is exhausting, to say nothing of just the lived experience of existing in the world and being impacted in these issues outside of your day job. And so any conversation about amplifying change at scale, empowering people at scale to do more together, to go farther together, is really, really compelling to me. And I can only imagine for all of the folks out there, you know, trying to advance change in their respective issue spaces, that it would be meaningful for them to know that this group of people is having this conversation. So that's a bit of why I am here. I'd love to invite Carmen and Carlos to just tell us your organization, and if you feel moved, what's bringing you into this conversation today.
Great.
Not it.
Hi, all. I feel like everybody discovered the pretzels and the chocolate-covered almonds and the sodas at this moment, and so I'm really grateful for you all running over there to grab some snacks and coming back in here. And thankful for the folks at Global Philanthropy Forum for hosting this conversation. I feel like a lot of folks are hungry for, there is no English word for calor humano, like human hot, human warmth. And I am so grateful for organizations that spend the time to find opportunities to tether us together in real life in the crazy health, climate, time world that we're in. So thanks to Global Philanthropy Forum, just like 1 second. I think it's like an important thing to do. My name is Carmen Rojas, and I am the president and CEO of Marguerite Casey Foundation. at Marguerite Casey Foundation, we are really focused on investing in leaders, initiatives, scholars that are shifting the balance of power in society to those folks who've long been excluded from having it. And that looks a couple of ways. On the one side, we offer, I feel like we're a good poster child for everything that was said in every earlier panel. We are a multi-year general operating support funder of local grassroots organizing work that's happening across the country. We have a Freedom Scholars initiative in which we support a number of scholars, primarily progressive scholars on the left, that are both critiquing the systems that are hurting our communities and that are offering a better vision for our future. We, like a number of philanthropies, are an investor and are actively thinking about the ways that we use all of our resources in alignment of our mission and are in the, to be honest, the messy work of that, of trying to understand that. I feel like you kicked us off with like this juicy, what is it, like a stick in the ground. I am also tired and I have a worry for us in philanthropy. And I think that I wanted to be a part of this panel because I think it's important for us to ruminate with each other, to meander. My worry is that our sector has really confused self-care for collective liberation. And there is an undue amount of resources in philanthropy in particular that are spent trying to create a mirror between social movements on the ground that are actively every day engaging people in the hard work of bringing them into the story of our future and our job, which is to move money to those people. And our institutions, I feel like, are creating a really difficult set of conditions for organizations on the ground, on the front lines of this work. So I would add on that I am also tired, and I am a privileged woman of color who went to UC Berkeley, who grew up down the street from here, and want to own that at the institution that I have the great privilege to run. We're grappling with a set of issues that I think a number of institutions in philanthropy are grappling with, which is like, what is our place in social movement building? And how do we not atrophy social movements by creating a set of conditions that are impossible for them to replicate within their own institutions, by not offering enough money, by paying, most people who work in foundations earn above and beyond what the average American worker makes, and we are not honest about the privileges afforded to us in a meaningful way. And so I'm glad that you put that in the ground, and I'm happy to be here with you today.
Happy to have you.
Thank you both. My name is Carlos Saavedra. I am from Peru. Anyone else here from Peru? Ooh. We got to talk about going to a restaurant later. Okay. I came, just to tell you just a little bit about myself, I came here to the United States when I was 12 years old. My parents brought me to Boston, which is a very cold place, and we were the last family out of 4 other families that moved to the U.S., and we all lived in a 3-bedroom apartment, 16 of us. And a year after we got here, anyone here is the oldest sibling in your family? Just raise your hand if you're an older sibling. Good. Anyone who's an older sibling but also an older cousin? You had to be both, by the way. Good, okay. So I am that, which in immigrant life, that means that your leadership is you just have to step to the line, whether you like it or not. And a year after I got here, I found my mother was crying. She was very distressed. I actually come from an Afro-Indigenous family, and my grandfather, the black side of my family, he was very sick. He had been sick for a while. He was a taxi driver in Peru, and in Peru the roads are not very even, the roads actually everywhere in the world like this. And a lot of people that are taxi drivers suffers from kidney disease because their kidneys are always like this. So my grandfather was basically dying, and I told my mother, she told me he was dying, and I said, well, you need to go see him, And she said, I can't go because if I go, then I cannot come back in 10 years, And I think it must have been maybe 3 weeks later, my mother and her sisters, my aunts, were on the phone, and in the other side was the funeral. So when I got here, my parents told me that we were undocumented and that was the life that we were going to experience. But I told them, what does that mean? And they say, it's just going to be hard. And let me talk to their kids if I had long hair, so I cut my hair. I did whatever I could to try to organize people, and about 12, 13 years later, after building an organization and traveling 20 out of 30 days for 5 years about our travel across the United States, building immigrant youth groups, we won something called DACA. I was with 2 other people in the negotiating side of winning that legislation. Thank you. Thank you. And that really changed my life. My brother actually has DACA, so we're also suffering from the stress of DACA being taken over every other week. But after we succeeded, all these people came to us, to the people that were in this movement, because I wasn't the only one, and said, Carlos, you got to teach us what you do. And as sportscasters, one time said, when you win, everything you did was right, and when you lose, everything you did was wrong. I couldn't tell the difference, because for me, we were losers forever. We're losers all the time. We're losing deportations, we win some stuff, but most of the times we're losing, right? So in the effort, I thought we were losers, but every time you go to another organization, I kind of wanted to say, hey, do you have problems? They would say, no, we have no problems. So I said, that's weird, we all have problems. My movement was a complete mess. So then I did a training, because people kept asking me about what we did, and then this woman kind of spilled the beans, told me all her problems. And I said, what did you do that? She said, oh, you're kind of like a movement therapist. And that's why I opened a training institute. So I work at a training institute called Ayni. We do trainings for people that are trying to build social movements. We also work with indigenous communities to support them back in Latin America. That's another whole other thing. But we are engaged in that process of finding people, building up when you do not see where movements are at. And we can talk a lot about things. They go to summer, time of high maximization, and they go to fall where they harvest what that cycle has been about, and they go back to winter. We think leaders go through 4 to 6 year cycles, and we think movements go through cycles that are 5 to 15 years long. And part of what we study is that we believe that to tell the weather of a movement, you have to know the cycle of a movement. And that each season, you have to do the right thing. And for us, that's what strategy is. Strategy is doing the right thing at the right time. Most of the times, sometimes we do the right thing. Sometimes we screw up and do the wrong things. But sometimes we do the right thing, but we do it at the wrong time. And this is a huge problem in questions of strategy. So that's what we work on. I'm excited to nerd out on the panel. That's all I do. So I apologize. I'm a nerd. I read about this stuff, and I'm excited.
I feel like this is a safe space for nerds.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, yeah.
Thank you. I love the seasonality metaphor. I'm definitely going to bring that back to my team. So I'm looking at my notes. I'm not a texting millennial. For that absence of doubt. So kind of just like a baseline setting question, just pretend, you're explaining it to somebody who spends no time thinking about this. What is the difference between a social movement and a social organization? So I'm an alien, I'm coming here, I'm looking at the internet, yikes, but I'm seeing a bunch of websites and social media accounts that say similar words, similar missions, similar visions. What characterizes a movement in contrast to some of those other entities?
Have you ever done this exercise where like people get these Post-it notes and they write their things and then they share it at the same time? I really do wish we had an opportunity to do that, because I'm curious to see where we jibe and where we disconnect. I'm so curious. You want to do, I'll do one feature and you do one feature for social movements, and then we'll. So I think social movements are powered by everyday people. Right now, we confuse social movements and say, oh, the staff of a nonprofit, they are the movement. Or Twitter people, or Twitter tweets, are social movements. I think social movements are powered by a librarian, by a baker, by a construction worker who has a job out in the world and is compelled in their heart to join their brothers and sisters to make their lives better.
Yeah, I agree.
You buy that?
Yeah.
Okay, now you do one.
Okay, my Post-it note. Well, it's a complex question, but I think in the simplest form, a social movement is how the population orients towards issues, basically the problems. And what we see most visibly of a social movement is mass protest, which is when people are very angry and they go to the streets for an issue. But actually, a movement has multiple things. They have mass protest, which is what it's building power. Then they have community organizing, which is people actually doing local groups and bringing the librarians and everyone together. Then there's people that are working on the inside game, and there are people that are actually within the halls of power, whether it's in the media, whether it's in the government, and they're trying to shift the policy based on the pressure that the people on the outside are doing. So a social movement is multiple things working together, but to actually change the reality of a particular social issue, and people can only understand issues that the public understands. So sometimes we get too ahead of ourselves, and we want the public to be more conscious that it is. But I think that's what movements are. They're the heartbeat of issues in the country.
Well said. Really well said.
I love that. You want to keep going a little bit?
No, you
Yeah. No, but
No,
you
you're
want to keep
supposed to
going.
know.
No, I know, but you want to go together again?
Sure.
Let's do another thing.
Okay. You go do
I
that?
think like the amazing thing about Carlos's work is this ecosystem model, right? That like, again, my frustration with philanthropy is that we are in a moment where we're like, we are the movement. And I'm like, no, we are the inside people. And so I tell anybody that we give a grant to, any of our partners, I'm gonna make a decision that disappoints you because my job is a different job than being out trying to convince people that we need to raise wages. Like my job is a different job. And I think that we're in a moment where we believe that everybody needs to have the same exact job. And your work around ecosystem, for me, the most robust social movements are social movements that allow people to play different roles in service of a common future.
Amen.
And I think you do that, like your assessment of ecosystem and inside-outside role helps us contend with the messiness of being a human being. Board member of an institution that supports grassroots organizing efforts that are trying to reimagine safety without policing. That's messy. Like, that is messy in every which way. And I think that is where the vast majority of people live, right? Like that we want to make the solutions for the social problems that we have neat and clean. And like, if only you say this thing this way, then everything will change. And I'm like, no, actually, like, it's messy. And I think that the ecosystem model and this nature seasons example allows us to surrender to the messiness of being a human being.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I am a frustrated community organizer. You know, I mean, I say that because we haven't. You know, when I was in high school, I wanted to legalize my parents. You know, and it's been now 20, 25 years, and they're still haven't legalized my parents. You know, so after I thought, you know, I was 15. I thought by 18 I want to be a classical piano player. Then by 20 we would solve poverty, and then by 22 I would be normal. Then I realized I'm never going to be normal because I think being normal in this society is to be unconscious. And I cannot go back the wheel anymore. But in those years, I think what happens is that for me, movements is a contentious space. This is a place to be brave. If you're not brave, this is not for you. I say that all the time because I think some people want to be in this space, but they don't want to fight. We need warriors. I'm just sorry to say that, you know? And we need discipline. I mean, discipline can only be built through practice and preparation, you know? And that's not me saying that's all the great movements. We have 200 years of social movement history that we all sit on the top of people that have created discipline where there was no discipline before. How do you confront the police? How do you, without being violent, with being nonviolent, how do you bring people in when there is a difficult situation? So I think movements to me are about being very courageous, and they're a leadership practice, so it's about the domain of uncertainty. One thing that we learned over the years is that an organization alone cannot win anything. You need a movement. A movement to me is a collaboration between hundreds of organizations and thousands of both affiliated and unaffiliated individuals. People that just walk out the street and they're like, I'm in your movement. You think that's beautiful, but that's also a problem because all of us have different conceptions of what the solution is. Yes or no?
Yes.
So to us, what we've seen over the years, and going back to the history books of the last 200 years, because actually, you know, for example, in the United Farm Workers movement here in California, in Michigan, in the labor movement library, you have transcripts of what Cesar Chavez was in their training meetings. You can get transcripts of that. And the same problems that those movements had in the past, the movements today have, we train people from Europe, from Latin America, similar problems. At this point, I would be dumb after training, I don't know, 8,000, 9,000 people if I don't see that there's the same problems. And one problem that we find is that there's 5 different theories of change, different orientations that people have to how to create change. The first one is personal transformation. I create change by changing one individual. Has anybody here had a teacher that did that for you? That believed in you, that did everything for you? They believe that they change one person, they change the world. There's another person that does alternatives. I want to create a cooperative. I want to create an alternative to incarceration. I want to do something different and embody a different way. Has anybody here have been in a cooperative of single people that are? I have 3 more that we. Just raise your hands. The people that didn't raise their hands, thank you for lying about other things. Then you have 2 other ones that are we call the outside game. One of them is community organizing. People doing local community organizing to find local leaders and try to punch the power holders and get something from them. And then you have mass protest. Mass protest is basically when something explodes and people are on the streets. Try to control that. It's those 5 different things usually are fighting with one another. Community organizer says to the inside game, you all are sellouts. They say to personal transformation, you're in too many retreats. Personal transformation says to the other ones, you all need therapy. You get what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
And what we notice in our research is that when we look at that list of the top movements in our world history, both in the history and contemporary, there's one single feature that we see. Is all these theories working together. Meaning that the alternatives become the power of community organizing because they feed them workers. We see that the inside game actually protects the rest of the ecology. Funds the ecology, protects them to rules or regulations. Personal transformation becomes a place where people can develop their leadership for a lifetime. So that thing is what we call movement ecology, and we think a movement without it doesn't have the strategic resources to win.
Ooh, everybody, we just call it a day. Call it a day. Yeah. I will say, because it's the Global Philanthropy Forum, this is an invitation to accept that we are on the inside and that we play a role and that we do a disservice to folks when we're like, act like us, be like me, write a 25-page report. Here is $50,000. Tell us how with $50,000 you are going to end global warming. Like the absurdity of the bureaucracy belongs in philanthropy, but not in the relationship with organization. I think we often use organizations as subjects to our bureaucracy as opposed to bureaucratize our institutions so we're most efficient to get the most money to leaders on the front lines of fights. The reporting is the reporting, the application. I think we tell ourselves, we're in this moment, I think, where philanthropy is telling itself a bunch of equity lies. One of which is like, we're giving money to the most proximate people, but the parenthetical is like, the most proximate people that I know and I choose and I like, that's who we're giving the money to. And I think it's all right to be honest and say, we're giving most money to the people that I think actually are advancing the future that we want. And that is different than trying to have a more even playing field. I want to go back to a thing that you said about the tension, and we started talking about this in the back. The hardest thing for me, I started this job in June of 2020, and there are a bunch of things that have been really hard, and I own that I made a bunch of unforced errors, that I made a bunch of early mistakes. As a leader stepping into an institution during a pandemic, I was really afraid and moved so quickly that I sort of cracked the edges of an institution. And we are working to rebuild it, but I think it's important to name that. And the people always talked about the politeness of philanthropy, and it was really astounding to me how difficult it was for both people within institutions and across institutions to have meaningful conversations of conflict and still have a depth of love and care for each other. That the way that people act is, you're not doing the thing that I'm doing or the thing that I want to happen, so fuck you. Like, you're nobody. I don't actually want you to be a part of it. And I think we are doing that consistently in our movement spaces, in our institutions, with each other. And the greatest learning for me over the last 2.5 years has been essentially creating a giant bubble of oxygen around myself. And because I am a privileged person that gets to work on the inside of an institution, and like recasting the story of us that isn't a fight against, but that's a fight for. And it's been a hard thing for me, mostly because we don't know how to fight with each other without like killing each other. And this is a big cousin, big brother thing. Like, I'm the youngest kid, the only girl, one of the younger cousins. My mom is one of 17 kids. I grew up down the street from here. But the gift of being the youngest kid, youngest cousin in a giant family, I think is that you are always the test of the fight. You know, like my cousins got really into WWF wrestling, so they would be like, all right, let's throw you around. Let's see what that looks like. And so I developed a resilience where I knew it was like fun fight, like disagreement in service for, building a muscle for. And I worry that we're in a moment where we don't know how to bring our ecosystem together. Yeah.
It's so important. And you referenced, Carmen, your own leadership and how it's been tested in this work and what you've learned. And I'm curious from each of you what you see in this space. What are some of the leadership qualities or just experiences that movement leaders in particular need to develop or would be better for having had? Because all we're hearing and seeing in our work is just complexity. Like the tagline is complexity. You're managing different points of view. You are collaborating with people in one moment who in the next you're kind of adversaries with, just necessarily to advance things. And I know for myself, I've known people who were kind of accidental movement leaders. Before working in social impact, I worked in the music industry, and the woman that I shared a desk with her name's Jamila Thomas. She's the woman who came up with the Black Square. Yeah. That was just supposed to be a music industry thing about we're not going to work on Tuesday, album release day, until the music industry acknowledges Black pain, and it became like, and then she was like, oh, I think I am a movement or a sub-movement leader, you know, and watching her kind of like enter this space. So I'm just curious about, you know, both of you provide sustenance, you provide capacity and kind of thought partnership. What are some of the leadership just muscles and calluses that movement leaders really need?
Just know your cycle. If you're working on a social issue, what season are you in? So, for example, for movements, the literature is confusing because when we go back to the research, it's hard to know the cycle of a movement. You only see the summers. You only see the activity, but you don't see what's underneath a whole cycle. So a movement, winter is a time where the soil of a movement is beginning to emerge, the openness. But the only season you can stay forever is the winter if there is no new seeds that are planted. And that's where the spring comes. Time for experimentation. People begin to tell a new story about the problem, you know. If you're undocumented, people come out and they say they're undocumented. These are big things. They're huge things. If you've been incarcerated, you begin to say, no, I'm formally incarcerated. You begin to have a whole narrative change. You begin to build new organizations. I can tell you when we look at the movements, I can tell you, if there's organizations that are by directly affected people emerging, I know they're going to have a spring. It's just coming. It's just the moment is coming. And the question is, are they going to have a good spring or a bad spring? And that's why I'm in this conference, because, you know, really you all need to operate with a cycle framework, I think, if for the people that are funders, and think about, okay, what do the special needs for the spring? How can we allow for experimentation? Because in the summer, you cannot experiment anymore. You have to go. You have to go. You have to burn all the boats and take the island. You have to go. So summer is going, and you in a movement got, you know, if the winter's calm, the spring is like this, the summer is like this. One day is great, the next day you die, you revive. That's how movement cycles happen. And then if you were able to move power, because the issues of disenfranchised people in the United States are issues that are based on power. We don't have things because we don't have agency. We don't have power. So a movement builds power through basically 10 years. If you build some power and some leverage, then you can have a movement fall. And that's where you go back into the inside game and you get everything you can. That's what happened with us. We went through a whole cycle and then the opening happening through the election, and we just took everything we could. Okay? We just didn't know that's what we were doing. I think a lot of us are programmed to think cyclically. I think that this is the normal nature of life. So doing the right thing at the right time means funding the right thing at the right time. And my only biggest advice is like, why are you doing this? I'm just gonna be honest. There's other things that are easier to do. But if you're gonna do this, time is of the essence. What do I mean by this? Is that what is 15-year cycles? It's a long time. But whatever you choose to support in winters will give you the quality of summers that you want. But most funders don't fund winters. They only want to fund summers. And not only that, they're only funding fake summers.
That's right.
Because we confuse a hot day in the spring for a summer day.
That's
and
right.
then money in the right place at the right time, just like heat, can warm something beautiful. But too much heat and you burn something out. And that's what we do.
Yeah.
So that's one of my biggest advice. It's like, what season is the movement you're in? What do they actually need to move to the next cycle? Because it's a really 10-year investment.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people have a critique, right? You give me a 1-year investment, I need at least 3 to go through one season.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think for the funders in the room, one, I couldn't agree more. And this is why the multi-year general operating support is really important, right? So when I joined the foundation, like the conversation that I feel like in my imagination we should be having is that we changed everything. We funded 260 organizations across the country, and everybody got $100,000. It didn't matter if you were a $20 million organization or a $1 million organization. You got $100,000 from Marguerite Casey Foundation. But I had an insight and a gift, which is building an organization before starting this job, in which a labor union 1 year gave me $5 million. And I could run. I could actually build organization. And so in year 3, I was like, oh, I should raise more money. And Hillary Pennington is right here, so I'm always giving Hillary and the Ford Foundation a big shout out. There were 3 funders that essentially each took up somewhere between 10 to 25% of my budget. And it was like guaranteed I would have that money. And I think funders need to fund for the long term and in meaningful amounts. So giving people, again, the $100,000 every year for 20 years actually may be more work than it's worth it. Let's just be honest. We made the commitment at Marguerite Casey that we were going to fund organizations up to 5 years, 25% of their budget. And that meant that we had to change the parameters of our funding. It meant that we weren't going to fund the $20 million organization because we're not that big. Like, we had to set our expectations appropriately about what our role was in the ecosystem. And then we had to do a different kind of job, which is to build meaningful relationships with other larger funders and other smaller funders so that we could move together in the same way so that we weren't starving or burning up movement organizations. Yeah.
I love that. Such important points about, working as a collective and then also not funding leadership in a transactional way, funding them to be set up to go through several cycles and actually sustain themselves. Can we talk a little bit about solidarity? That word comes up a lot in movement work, supporting each other across differences but through shared interests. So I'm just curious if you've seen any places where cross-movement solidarity has really made a difference. So maybe we are not down to every last line in our mission statement, supporting the same cause, but we understand enough about the world and about our systems and about the experiences of our community and coalition that we're going to join forces and work together. And if you haven't, what would you like to see in terms of solidarity?
This is another place I wish we could do this little post-it note
And
test. I think there are a couple of places. I think, we just had this panel on funding of public health. I was so inspired by mutual aid work, which is far out of the realm of philanthropy. Very few philanthropic institutions knew how to contend with mutual aid, which is like people coming together and being like, my neighbor is older or sick. I need to figure out how to get them some food. Oh, they can't get them some food? Let's figure out how the two of us are going to get together, like this day-to-day human beings coming together to solve a problem without the need of institutional guardrails felt so powerful to me. I see solidarity in the secrets that we keep. So movements are messy because human beings are messy. And I am most skeptical of the people on social media ready and willing to tear people down. I think that we are in a moment in which we're sucking the oxygen out of people's hearts because we're on the one hand saying, we need experimentation and like plant 1,000 seeds and everything will bloom. And then somebody is like, well, here's my little purple corn seed and I'm going to put it down in the ground. And then everybody is like, what the fuck, man, a purple corn seed? Why would you bring that? It's so crazy. You sound so, and the wildfire around dissent, around difference and disagreement on social media, I think is only going to get worse and more pernicious given what's happened in the last week. And so I want to name that we are in a moment where I feel like we are losing the opportunity to hold the fire, to keep people warm, to grow things in the calor humano, the human warmth of solidarity, because our institutions are ill-equipped, and frankly, we have a bunch of enemies who are working against us. And so I think that for me, that feels like, one, mutual aid, but two, just like a warning about what feels like is disrupting or putting a finger in the eye of solidarity in this moment.
Thank you. I'm listening. I'm trying to figure out what to say. Who here likes multitasking? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you like multitasking. Let's see multitaskers here. Who's really proud about being a multitasker? You can do 600 things at once. Anybody? Okay, good. I have a 9-month-old baby, and me and my partner, we noticed that with the baby, our capacity to multitask has lowered a lot. Has anybody experienced this before? People that have kids, right? And when we multitask too much, something happens, which I have to admit publicly, that the baby falls down and hits himself in the floor or the chair, and then we look at each other and like, were you multitasking? So I say this because I think it's really hard to work with another person, another group, if you don't know who you are. If you don't know who you are and what's your role in social change, then you're always going to be projecting your insecurity about your role to others. And if you're doing that, then you're not able to develop craft and proficiency and mastery that we have. So I think the problem that we have in collaboration is that we don't have a specialization, is that how you say it in English? We actually need a specialization. What do I mean by this? Is that we need the best people on the inside game, the people that can get a deal with anything. I think people sometimes forget that Lyndon B. Johnson in the civil rights movement in the United States was a powerful figure. In what do they call him? The Lion of the Senate? I forget. He was intense. But I think without him, he did a significant portion of the job to get the bill of the civil rights. But he alone couldn't have done it without the civil rights movement in the streets and the community organized. Are you following me on this? Now, the history books always write things from the perspective of the inside game. Okay? Like I seen books where they say, how was gay marriage won? And they say, well, somebody did a court case. You're telling me that the only thing people we're doing a court case. If it was a court case, the only thing that would win things, then why are we here? Just to sue that. Court cases, which is an inside game, is one strategy, but there's other ones. So I think what we need is people doing the role on the strategy and going for mastery. Okay, mastery. We need people that can do mass protests, good mass protests. Have people seen bad mass protests? Just raise your hands. Good. Thank you for lying about all the things as well. We need good people that can do alternatives and cooperatives. The problem in our field is that a lot of us, I think, sometimes our field, and I say this not just in philanthropy, and even though I'm not in this field per se, but I'm saying in the field of social change, the whole world does not respect people in social change. They think what we're doing is charity. It's a hobby. You'll walk it off. Has anybody heard this before? And because of that, some of us have internalized that there is no craft in this. And because we have not internalized craft, we try to remove the tension on this stuff. So I just think we need a lot more preparation. That's why I'm a community organizer, but that's why I work at a training institute. I actually think people need to have a college education on this stuff. I'm sorry, you cannot look. If you go to baker school to become a baker, or because you're going to burn your fingers, how you tell me that this does not impact people? How you tell me that this doesn't require preparation? And if we're not training thousands of people to know their role, how are they going to collaborate if I don't know? What's your role? Are you cut the food or you cook? Oh no, we all do the same thing. And if we're not going to solve complexity if we don't have a specialization. So I don't know if we can get to collaborate, but that's at least the first thing I think.
Absolutely. And what I'm appreciating, and it echoes something you said in the beginning as well, Carmen, is just this confidence and permission to stay in your lane and be assured that as long as you are listening and being cooperative with the folks in their respective lanes, you are still a meaningful part of the movement. But we don't literally all need to try to merge into the same lane and then find some lanes vacant, some lanes too crowded, too messy to get anything done. And I appreciate you both bringing that up, because I think sometimes we just need to hear that. That like you're not supposed to literally do every last little thing, and newsflash, you're not going to be good at all of it. So figure out what you're good at and turn it all the way up, and then seed power, platform, resources to the folks in the other lane who can support you and join you. Kind of a related question. I kind of have an attitude about this question. I have like mixed feelings about this topic.
Juicy.
I'm curious how you are each thinking about measurement. I have like an hour by hour love-hate. There's kind of like a rigor movement happening, and the things that I appreciate about that is that there's intention behind that, there's transparency and accountability. We can have a different level of conversation with that, but the things that I find frustrating are, it's been said so many times, even just today, like there are aspects of this work that are qualitative and hard to capture. There are aspects of this work that are best reflected on in retrospect and hard to predict and control for, let alone like robotically replicate as though there are no outside factors. It's not like a lab experiment, And so sometimes I feel really proud and happy to be working in an organization that is committed to measuring impact, and other times I have an attitude and feel like you're limiting me and like, let me just try and let you know. So I'm curious, in each of your fields of work, how do you look at measurement and impact measurement in the realm of something as alive and complex and multifaceted as a movement?
You want to go?
Good. It's hard, I think, so a couple of years ago, I think the best way to learn your role is through training. I think the best way to organize ecology is through training. And I say this because when we're in coalition meetings, nobody wants to be weak. Is this true or not? But in training, everyone is a learner and everyone has to open up, which I think that's what's a cool thing. So in our training, sometimes funders come and they get to see the real conversations of movements. And there was a funder that came from Open Philanthropy, Chloe Cockburn, a couple of years ago, and she was like, this ecology stuff is good. And she had all these questions. How do you measure things? How do you stuff? So we said, look, it's going to take us 2 to 3 years of research to figure out these questions. So we can do it. And she said, no, here it is, write it, go do it. So we did it. So we created something called the Funding Movements Guide. What's the Facebook thing called that we're all using here, the app? I forget. To see the agenda on each other. What is it called? WOVA? WOA? Okay, that one. In my bio, I put the link so you can see it if you want. But in there, we created a set of metrics that explain how do you measure it. We think there's 3 measurements that are important to measure. One, there's the most obvious one that everyone goes after, so I'm going to say it, which is institutional gains. Did you change the law or not? That's a measurement. But underneath the measurement, there is active support. How many people are voting on your issue? How many people are taking action on your issue? It's quantifiable, by the way. And Erica Chenoweth, that now is at Harvard, said that any time 3.5% of the population of any nation takes on the streets, you can shift an issue or overthrow a government. So in the United States, that's about 11.5 million people on the streets in continuous action. So there's measurements to measure active support, okay? And then underneath that is passive support, which is public opinion. Public opinion is extremely, extremely important because are there issues in the United States today that are extremely important that nobody knows about in the majority of the population? Tons of issues. Yeah. There's tons of issues that don't have public opinion, that don't have the power, but public opinion is not enough. For example, in gun control, you have, what is the percentage of people that support gun control in the United States? Does anybody know the number? Just a range, anybody? I think it's upper 70s, right? Mm-hmm. Right? So you can have the majority of the population, but without activating the population on the streets, you actually don't have power. So you can measure those 3 things. That's what we used to measure, you know? And again, these things can only be developed in 10-year cycles. You can't shift public opinion in a year. It takes a few years. And you cannot, you change people's perception about an issue, then you propose them a way to take action. That takes another 3 or 4 years. And then you battle it in the inside institutions. That takes another 3 to 5 years. That's about 10 to 12 years. That's the patterns that we see. Do they work all the time? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But that's a little bit of how we measure it. And we think that if you measure that, you can see what season your movement is in and whether your movement is kind of has a chance or not.
What do you do around, I'm sorry, you mind?
No, please.
I want to ask you this question, but then I want to be able to answer the question too. What do you do when people tell you about the urgency of now?
Well, I mean, I think we have to hear people's stories, you know, and we need to have personal transformation to be able to grieve the pain of the world. I mean, so, you know, I think for example, I am committed as a lifetime of social change, meaning that I see my children and my family members being part of this, and that I'm going to die in the same thing doing the same thing that I have. But I know that to do that, my spiritual teachers tell me that, and have made me reflect that sometimes leaders eat the problems of the world. And that's part of what leadership is. You're putting a problem in your mouth. And if you put too much, you get very sick. So to be able to not get too sick, you have to have a spiritual formation because, I mean, I don't know. I mean, in my movement, when you see that much pain, that's why people burn out, by the way, because they cannot deal with the grief of the world. So unless you're not grieving and processing the pain, which if you're a leader, you're basically saying to people, your problem is my problem, let me put it in my mouth, and we're going to chew it together. That's what leadership is really at a spiritual level. So we have to create this space for people to have we need wisdom, and wisdom is knowing how long things take. So I said, yes, you're right, there's an urgent issue. So what season are you in? You're in the winter, great. What we need is a breakthrough in public opinion. We need to make this issue known everywhere. How can we get a caravan of 10 of your leaders? How can we support you raising some money? And let's go across the country and talk to everyone we can. How do we design a meta-narrative, a story that we can get and talk to any American or anyone in this country or anyone in this world about our issue that you can do in 2 minutes? That's what we need. Do that for 2 years, and that will give you the breakthrough next. It's urgent, yes. It needs to be solved tomorrow. It won't be solved tomorrow, but I'm telling you, someone that I don't know how people feel about it, but Bill Gates says that we tend to overestimate what we can do in a year. We make all these plans in New Year for losing weight and all this. I do that all the time. Not happening right now in my life. but we underestimate what could happen in 10. So what I mean by that is that the urgency needs to last us 10 years. Because actually, if you have urgency every year, but you don't actually do it, in 15 years, you'll be in the same place. I want you in 10 years to be at a different place. Right? We can change this thing. I really deeply believe we can change society, not just based on heart, that's one part, but based on strategy. And based on feet. There's billions of people in the world that are in community organizations. You're telling me we cannot organize those people, we cannot get our together? Of course we can. But we have to have a breakthrough. We have to have an insight, about something deeper, and we have to have courage. And I'll share this last thing if it's okay.
No, please.
In the Dream Movement, when we were doing this thing, young undocumented people, nobody cared. Very few groups cared about us, okay? Because we're young people, we're stupid, we're undocumented, okay? And we were in the midst of a winter to spring moment, and one founder gave us $200,000, okay? Now, what's $200,000? For us at that time, we never seen that much money in our lives, okay? We have no papers, we all have little jobs. We had this money to build a network. This funder took a huge risk on us. And I can tell you, because I have to be honest, in retrospect, without the money, I don't know what kind of cycle we would have. That little bit came at the right time, but for us was everything. So in 10 years, we won't be able to take the bets for now. We have to take bets now. We have to take bets now, because you have to have a big bet every year. And if you have a lot of money as a foundation, I don't know. I'm a working class person. I don't know how much a lot of money is. I'm always get confused about that, Good food sometimes for me is a lot, But what I'm saying is you got to take some bets, because you have to, the history I think of you as a founder, my history for me even as a leader is I want to be in two ways. I took all this risk and I failed completely and miserably, or I succeeded in some things. But I don't want one where I took the easy way, because then why am I doing this? I should just go play the piano and hang out with my kid, But if I'm going to do this, burn the boats, put the money. You don't know. You cannot. 10 years. Time is the greatest resource.
That's right.
You can't wait too much.
That's right.
The groups are there, and a group might be in the right moment, and if they don't get the right support, they might die.
That's right.
You know how long it takes to rebuild a group? Holy moly. It's a lot. Sorry, I got excited. Sorry.
No, but
it was the chocolate almonds from the
I do think that that's a good bridge and a distinction between how a capacity building training organization, how a movement organization should think about evaluation compared to how a funder should think about evaluation. And I think that there's a distinction. So I don't think funders should have metrics for evaluation and impact. I think everything we do is a bet. And I think we tell ourselves a lie every time we give somebody money and are like, again, here is $50,000. Let's say for us, our largest grant over the last year, here's $2.5 million. Here's change the world. In the context, I actually do know money. And $2.5 million is not that much money, and it's definitely not time. And I think funders create a whole lie infrastructure for themselves to make themselves feel better by saying they're going to collect data and information about small tweaks. Like, here's one more person that ate a gummy bear. Here are 4 more people who had Oreos. This person had a bowl of rice. And that means that no more people are hungry. That's crazy. That's like it's like an absurdity, and I think it feeds into a self-importance and, frankly, lack of situational awareness. If we think about philanthropy nationally, it's less than 1% of money in our national economy. We have a whole government. We just passed an inflation bill that is in the trillions of dollars. And I am astounded at how many funders are like, we're going to try and influence that. And I'm like, you sound so crazy. What are you talking about? We can't do that. People who have power can do that. People who are organized can do that. And I think it is our job not to come up with the measurement, not to hold people to an impossible standard, but to name that the gift of working in philanthropy is the gift of experimentation. It's the gift of the bet. It's the gift of the try. It's the gift of meeting a person, being in a place, watching an organization, and feeling like, oh yeah, there's like something that can happen here. And somehow we are in a moment where that is not we're telling ourselves a lie, where that is not enough. And I think that, I just turned 45. As a 45-year-old, I could never have imagined that my job is to go across the country. I was just at Alex Haley's farm in Tennessee and sat there and was like, wow, like a job where I can sit in a room with a group of leaders and be like, my insides, the inside work, my gut and my heart tell me that the things that I know about movements, that there's something here and that this is a bet and it may work and it may not work, but I'm going to be honest and try. Yeah. And I don't think that we do that enough in philanthropy and spend a lot of time. And if you get an email from Marguerite Casey Foundation, there's a lot of certainty. We come out real hot. There's like a lot of fire and a statement about a power and a moving of a thing. And our team is very clear that we're trying things. That the gift of these jobs, the gift of this work is to try to create an example. For me, it's a belief in government, right? So like my thing is that I believe our government should be doing so much more for us. And I want our philanthropic dollars to be put out into the world to have a bunch of experiments so that people start to recast their belief that government should actually work for them. And these are experiments. These are never going to be scalable. No all of our money, no $50 million grant, no $100 million grant is going to make that a possibility. But these experiments are fireworks that can be caught in the sky as stars, right? And that's the job, is that we are the firework putter-outers and that we can help create an enabling environment to reset the stars in our sky. And I feel like that is a clear distinction between your job and my job, and that our relationship and ecosystem, naming that distinction is an important thing. Yeah.
Something I really appreciate about just how you've shown up in this conversation, Carmen, is that paradoxically, the more...
So like, again, I have a sense of money. I'd always worked in and around money, and I built an organization, and I came into this job, and I was like, these foundation people just make this shit so fucking hard. This is idiotic. I'm gonna burn it all down. And I came in, it was like literally like a kid with a match, and was like into like the pit of gasoline. During a pandemic, during a racial reckoning. And I think that there is a way in which the lesson for me, the unforced error for me, the groundedness for me, the thing that I had to go through is a thing that you keep on coming, like intimating at, and frankly naming. Every conversation that you have is deeply loaded. That every time you smile at somebody, they have a feeling that there's going to be a check in the mail. That every friendship that you make, any personal thing that you share, all of a sudden becomes a bunch of people's personal thing. And I took for granted the groundedness for me is like rooting in me. And this job has given me the opportunity to come full cycle. Like I am making my way out of my summer. Yeah, and I just want to name that, because I think that seasons are true for us as human beings. Yes. And understanding there's rarely the room to say that I messed up. There's rarely the room of saying, I came in and was like, burn it, let's burn this down.
Yeah.
And not thinking about the collateral consequences and realizing, frankly, like harm I caused, and taking responsibility for that harm.
Yeah.
And I believe that it's our job as folks who work in and around an important resource, which is money, is to name when we do harm.
Yes.
We don't do it enough, and there are very few spaces where we can do that in an honest way with each other. Like bearing witness is a tough thing.
Yeah.
Saying you messed up when everybody thinks you're the smartest, most attractive, funniest person in a room is really tough. Like you don't really want to do that. You want to be with the people who are like, you're the best.
Right. But I appreciate it because that is part of the human element. This is human relational work. And so you're not going to be able to fully liberate that in other folks if you're suppressing it in yourself. So I appreciate that holistic leadership. I think to close us out, you guys have said, I mean, both of you just fonts of wisdom and perspective. Thank you so much. I'm curious if there's one thing that you want folks to leave thinking about with regard to the kind of relationship between movements and funders that we're striving for, that we're working towards, that they can hold on to, that they can say, okay, this is my direction of travel. This is a dynamic I should be going for. This is how I can feel good about how I'm helping. This is where I can learn the most, do the most good immediately. What would your advice be?
Is anybody struggling in your organization to get them to work next month because of the World Cup? Anyone struggling here? Just raise your hands honestly. My teammates are from Argentina, we have Brazilians too, and they're like, oh, the schedule, you know. So I just want to put out there, World Cup, amazing. Funders should fund us to go watch the World Cup. But I say that my dad was a soccer coach in Peru, so I was raised in soccer my whole life, and I disappointed him for not playing as good as he did. But what I mean by that is that just like movements, just like sports, this are team. You only win with a good team. And a good team is just a good ecosystem. And you have great teams, right? Soccer, you have Messi, and you're not winning the World Cup, Argentina.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Argentina. I love you with all my heart, but because you need a team. You need a team. Team is a sum of the parts. So I think what I think and I just want to also always offer my respect. I don't work in philanthropy. I respect it because I know that reciprocating something that is not yours is actually really hard to do. It's a spiritual, I think, not just a bureaucratic, but a spiritual need to be able to do reparations work, which is really what philanthropy should be in the United States, and I think in many places is. But this is a team sport, and I think there's been a good moment where funders are decentering themselves and learning about their role. But I think the next stage is about doing your role right. And I'm just sorry to say that, but you have to make bets. And I'm gonna be angry at your bets, but I'm gonna be more angry if you don't make bets. So you have to have a movement education. You have to read the score in the game. You have to pass the ball at the right time. You have a role, and I think if we're gonna win the issues of climate change, the housing crisis that we have, I mean, I'm sorry, the world's not looking good. Yes or no, fam?
Yeah.
You all gotta play your role, and we have to play our role. Yes or no?
Yes.
And our role is to respect you, because I think what we don't do, people that are working on the outside game and in philanthropy, is that we disrespect you, thinking that all of you are compromised or co-opted, when actually it's not a true. We don't even. Are there some people in the inside game that are co-opted? Yes or no? Yes, there are some people, but is everyone? No. There's amazing people that day and night go through the rules and their boards and pitching different things. Yes or no?
Yeah.
We have to respect the inside game. The inside game is extremely important if we're to succeed. And we have to do it well. Without the inside game, we cannot win the World Cup of Social Justice. So I hope.
I love that. I don't even know. This is a non-sequitur. I'm going to ruin your time. I know. I feel like people are really circling. I just saw a Paris Saint-Germain game where Messi scored the opening goal and Mbappe scored the last goal. And it was pretty remarkable. And non sequitur, this is like inside talk. Move the most money you can to the people and organizations that you care about with the greatest amount of ease. I feel like if there is a sentence, it's that. Move the most money. We hit 33%, so you don't tip an organization into a private foundation. Great. choose a number that is a meaningful number to an organization or a leader, make it easy, and do it for as long as possible. And I think that's the job. That's the job in front of us in this moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wasn't this a wonderful conversation? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. And I think that is a wrap. I don't, why is the power in me to say that, but I think we're like.
Is it pretzel time?
I think it's more pretzel time, cocktails and the whole bit. One more. Oh, great. Oh, one more. Oh, fabulous. Okay. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Nemonte Nenkimo.
Mi nombre es